I just hit stop on the record button of the episode that you guys are all about to watch and or listen to. I'm processing, I'm thinking about it, and I have no idea how to intro this episode. So I'll just say that my guest is Russ Desai. Russ is the founder and CEO of LiveKit. LiveKit got started during the pandemic as a kind of side project, an open source side project that Russ was kind of undertaking, and then it expanded, and the company has kind of pivoted somewhat into powering and enabling voice applications for artificial intelligence. So they're partnered up with OpenAI, powering voice mode, and Character.AI. Conversation specifically is that it goes very far beyond the actual roots of technological capability to a degree that stops mattering. What matters more is the humanity that exists around it, that uses it, that is impacted by it, the philosophy of humanity, the philosophy of good versus evil. These are big questions that have been confounding people for thousands of years. We've been asking the same questions forever. If you're new, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. This is the Deep View Conversations. Russ, thanks so much for joining me today.
Ian, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I feel like I always say this, but there's so much that I want to talk about with you, and I want to start with LiveKit, and then we'll go in some interesting directions later on. I'll keep you guessing.
Sounds good.
But LiveKit is interesting to me because you kind of launch as this open source project, right? And now you say it has become kind of an open source product. And this evolution from project to product, side thing to company is an interesting one over the past few years. And I wonder if you could kind of just walk me through a little bit of the journey of why, in the first place, do you think, let's launch this open source project? And then how does that, at what point do you go, wait a second, that maybe there's something here that's more than just like a side thing that I'm doing?
Yeah. It's funny because I just read a tweet the other day. A friend of mine, it's kind of this, I don't know if Paul Graham was the first person to say it in YC, but there's this kind of guiding principle to starting a company where it's like, scratch your own itch, build something that you need, and then the odds are that a lot of other people will need it too. And my friend was just remarking that he's tried this like 4 or 5 times, but maybe he's just so weird that nobody wants, the needs that he has aren't widespread enough to rationalize starting a company around it or scaling it up. I think for me, this was the first company or first thing that I had ever really done where I was working on something just solely because it was a need that I had. So started very different time in the world. It was during the pandemic, and I wanted to build something that allowed you to connect humans to other humans kind of in a casual way. I was building a clubhouse for companies, to use the X for Y metaphor. And I needed real-time audio-video infrastructure to stream the voice data between all of these users who were going to hopefully use my side project that I was working on, and wanted to integrate something. And there were a bunch of commercial tools out there for doing that. But then when I looked at open source, there was nothing. So literally almost nothing that allowed you to kind of build an app, stream audio back and forth, support large scale. Some of the companies that I think wanted to use this app that I had built in the early days of the pandemic, they were pretty large. They were 10,000 person companies for a couple of those design partners or early adopters. And there was no infrastructure in open source that could handle that level of scale, that was easy to deploy and maintain myself. And so I pinged a friend of mine, my old co-founder from the previous company that I had, and I said, hey, I need some help to build this infrastructure to support this side project I'm working on. And we started to work on it and became more interested in that than the original kind of idea, and just started to work on that, just the core infrastructure part. And over time, what you saw happen was that friends heard about that we were working on this thing, and they said, hey, could I get access to the GitHub repo? It's the pandemic, so I'm trying to build real-time audio video features into my app too. And that slowly, that number of developers that were interested in what we were working on, like friends invited other friends, and it just kind of snowballed over time to the point where we had enough momentum that we decided to launch it in open source as a full-blown open source project. And from there, it kind of exploded. And to speak to what you said around kind of open source project versus open source product, one thing that we did that I think really struck a chord with the community at that time was everybody working on these applications for real-time audio and video, or that needed real-time audio and video. I think before we entered into the space with this open source launch, people had only been using that infrastructure for video meetings, like conferencing. And then pandemic, all of a sudden, everything kind of shifted online, and every different way that you could weave together audio and video started to manifest in applications. People were exploring kind of many different types of use cases, and they all didn't look like a Zoom meeting. And they all didn't have a connection model of a Zoom meeting where there's like a time on the calendar and you all drop in and then you leave. And so before us, all the infrastructure providers on the commercial side, they just had like a web SDK, because where would you take business meetings, on a desktop computer? And so you don't really need anything other than a web SDK. But when we launched open source, we launched out of the gate not just with the media server, but with a JavaScript SDK, a React Native SDK, a Kotlin SDK, a Swift SDK. It was pretty much across every platform, because developers at that time wanted to be able to build all kinds of different things across any different platform or combination thereof. And so that's what I also think turned LiveKit into this thing that kind of exploded in popularity in open source when we first launched in 2021. And then, of course, over time, we've been evolving as a project and a product and a company.
It seems like in a lot of ways, a big catalyst is the pandemic.
The reason why I've talked about this a little bit in some conversations I've had recently. People ask me why. Like, why did LiveKit become popular? Why wasn't there anything in open source? And it only made sense to us in retrospect when we think about it. When you look at infrastructure, when there is a widespread need for that infrastructure, that's generally when a lot of open source projects spring up to meet that need. So take an example of a database. Every application developer needs a database, and so there are many, many open source database projects, all kind of optimizing for different things. For audio and video, real-time audio and video, there just wasn't a widespread demand for that infrastructure. As I mentioned, it was mainly used for video conferencing, not for 100 different things, not used in every single application. Pandemic hits, and then there's this kind of unnatural spike in demand for infrastructure for real-time audio and video, because suddenly every developer needed some way. You were either going to become a Zoom screen share, or you were going to build Zoom's functionality into your app. And so on that second side, open source hadn't caught up to that spike in demand because it was so acute in nature. And we just kind of, I guess, the timing just struck well for us. Like, we hit it right on the optimal time to kind of see this gap and work on it organically, because I needed it for my own side project. And then it kind of evolved into becoming the main project.
I think the timing of all this stuff is very interesting. Like, as you're saying, it's just kind of one of those fortuitous things where you hit it right. Yeah. But the pandemic seemed like a moment, beyond just you and your project in LiveKit, where it acted as a catalyst for a lot of other technology that, on the other side of it, I still think it's crazy that the pandemic was 5 years ago, is when it started. Because I feel like that there's that 12 to 18 month period of time, March 2020, that is just kind of 18 months out of time that just didn't really exist. And then everything afterwards is sped up so fast. And on the other end of it, ChatGPT comes out, and now we have like a generative AI push. And it seems like in some ways, And it's funny to think about too, because we're talking about the 2020s. Like the internet has been around for a while. Digitization is not a new concept, but it
Totally.
became necessary. And it seems like it was just a catalyst that pushed everything up, and your boat was on that tide too.
I think so. I think we were definitely on that tide. And it's not as much as I'd like to say that I foresaw that happening. I definitely didn't. I was. What's interesting to me is that I remember my previous company. I was in this kind of bomb shelter like building in Palo Alto, Escondido, right next to Escondido Village, which is next to Stanford. And there was a course in 2015, 2014. 2014, Andre Karpathy taught this convolutional neural network course, I think CS 231N at Stanford's campus. And it got kind of buzzy a little bit on X, or Twitter at the time it was called. And I pour one out for the bird, Larry.
Seriously.
Yeah. But I had heard about it, some folks talking about that course, and so we were right next to the Stanford campus with my previous company in Palo Alto, 2015, and so I would just walk over and sit in on Karpathy's course, and it was pretty cool and learned a lot. And definitely bought into kind of this hype of these neural nets that could kind of do image classification. And then AI sort of went through, I won't say a winter, but people started, OpenAI started sometime, I think 2015 or around that time. I remember they were also in Palo Alto. Or I'm pretty sure they're in Palo Alto. And then they went into like recurrent neural networks and LSTMs and all of this stuff, and then I feel like it kind of just died off a little bit, or went into like a mini winter where like, okay, well, these things aren't great. They're good for some things, but it's kind of narrowly focused. And then all of a sudden, during the pandemic, of course, I'd been playing around with ChatGPT, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know, it's GPT-2 or something. I'm like, this is pretty trash. I'm not going to use this, but in retrospect, when GPT 3.5 came out, and then or the ChatGPT website came out, I was like, wow, okay, this is really good. And, built a demo that you could talk to ChatGPT using LiveKit's infrastructure instead of texting with it, stream all the things, stream all the audio to the server, and then generate audio on the server and stream it back. And so we built this demo, and then OpenAI wanted to build a voice interface to ChatGPT, and they found that demo in the blog post I wrote. And then we ended up working with them on voice mode and powering all of that. And so, yeah, it's just amazing. It's like amazing how these things evolve. Like I did not anticipate that would happen. I'm definitely proud that our infra just scaled. I mean, we're powering all of advanced voice mode now, and our infra we've never had an outage, since we started working with OpenAI. And so it's kind of, it's amazing we've been able to accomplish that, but we definitely didn't have much time to anticipate it or plan for it. We just kind of scrambled and made it work, and testament to the engineering team at LiveKit. But I think, leading up to that moment, I did not know what the kind of destiny of the company was going to be. And now I know. Maybe I'm opening it up for you to ask me that. But yeah, I definitely, now it's become a lot more clear kind of what our role is and where this is all going to go.
Running a small business while keeping up with AI. Salesforce's Agentforce is bridging that gap with production-ready autonomous agents for sales, marketing, and customer service. We're talking real agentic AI here. Not just chatbots, but agents that can actually execute tasks, make decisions, and scale your operations. The early results are compelling. Businesses are seeing immediate efficiency gains and cost reductions without the typical AI implementation headaches. Salesforce has done the heavy lifting on model training, safety guardrails, and enterprise integration. If you're curious about practical AI deployment for small to medium businesses, check out their guide on AI agents. Head to tdv.co/sf to see how autonomous agents are actually performing in real business environments right now. That's t-d-v.co/s-f. Yeah, definitely an open one. I can't let that one sit. What is the destiny of LiveKit?
One thing I said when we raised our A round, which was end of 2023, voice AI was not a space. That's not something that people had even heard of or acknowledged as an industry. And I remember when we were going and pitching investors on this. So my pitch was this, right? I said, okay, when we built voice mode with OpenAI, like the thing that I realized at that time was, okay, they're going to build AGI. AGI, in my opinion, ultimately is going to become like a synthetic human being. It's like a computer that can think like and behave like and respond like a human. And it's like a human brain. And so if you're going to build a computer like that, that thinks like a human brain and responds like a human brain, how are you going to interact with that human-like computer? You're going to use the same inputs and outputs that you use with other humans, right? The default I/O for a human is eyes, ears, and mouths. The same kind of or equivalent sensors for a computer are cameras, microphones, and speakers. It turns out that LiveKit's is infrastructure built for wiring up cameras, microphones, and speakers anywhere in the world to the internet and streaming that data from wherever it originates to wherever it's destined to go. And so we're building kind of the nervous system to OpenAI's brain is how I was pitching it. And investors were like, yeah, I see that. That's awesome. But I think it's like 3 to 5 years out. I think you guys are like too early. And I'm like, well, do you think that AI is on an accelerating curve? Are we on all technological progress on like an exponential curve? And if you think that it is, why is this like one data point around like the interface somehow not on that curve, right? It's 3 to 5 years. Everything is accelerating. So your 3 to 5 years is probably going to be 1 to 2 years, is my guess. And now we've seen this play out, and it is definitely true. Like voice AI is an entire space. There's like thousands of companies in it. And so as this has gone on, like as we've been kind of working in this space, powering, transport layer for audio or for voice data for a lot of the largest AI labs in the world, not just OpenAI. I've been thinking more about like how does like the entire market expand? And one thing it's led me to, this is like a new thought I've had recently, so I'd love to hear you interrogate it. But
Sure.
I was thinking about before there's kind of been a few industrial revolutions in the world, and computers and the internet was kind of the third industrial revolution. What we did was, before computers and the internet, we would go and like talk to people, and we would ask people to do things for us. Like when we were trying to buy goods or have services done for us, we would talk to someone in person, or we'd get on the phone, and sometimes we would like write something down and mail it. And then the internet happened and the web, and everybody started to build these applications, which really optimized the margins on the supply side. So every business, instead of hiring a bunch of humans to talk to you and sell you stuff or perform services for you, instead will like put some pixels in front of your face and shift the burden to the customer to learn how to interact with these pixels and click buttons and fill out forms and all of that stuff. And that increases the margin on the for all of the suppliers or producers of goods and services. But it's also, these websites and applications on our phone are an approximation of what a human does. A human can do things more precisely, is more flexible. You can kind of give it natural language input. You don't have to learn where this button is. You could just tell the human being to do it for you. And so in a way, it's like this is how you scale up, like providing services, goods and services to the masses. And now with agentic computing, it's still the early days for it, so I'm not saying it's good enough yet, but with agentic computing, now all of a sudden you can have a computer program that is like a human and can do things with the precision of a human and with the flexibility of a human. And the consumer of that agentic application no longer has to like look at UI. They don't have to remember where the buttons are. They don't have to use their computer as much and like sit on it and scroll and click and type things. Instead, you just say what you want, And the agent will come back and ask you to clarify, or might show you a menu with some UI, some light UI. It doesn't have to be some kind of crazy thing, complicated rendering. But the agent is going to do more of the inference or the compute for you instead of you doing the inference by staring at your phone and like moving a mouse around and typing on a keyboard. And so in that world, I believe that voice actually becomes a dominant interface again. Voice was a dominant interface before the web, before this third industrial revolution. And now when you have a computer that can do way more work for you, and more precisely and more flexibly, everything shifts back to voice again. It shifts back to natural human I/O, not the human having to learn how to type, or the human having to learn how to operate a mouse, or which buttons to tap on a screen and where that button's located. And so that's kind of thing where I think everything is going. I think the web is going to get eaten by the, I don't know if you want to, the web is an agentic, the agentic web, I don't know what you want to call it. It's not the agentic web. I mean, what I've been thinking about is that ChatGPT is actually a browser, right? It's the agentic equivalent of the web browser. And there will be other browsers too, I think. It won't just be them, but you will interact with that browser using primarily voice. And yes, you will touch it too, and you'll use your thumbs in places. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to talk, but a lot more than you are today, you will talk to these systems. And I think that's where LiveKit really comes into play, as we are building we've evolved over time, of course, from the transport network to really an end-to-end application building framework for voice AI. That's kind of the direction we're going. Like, if you are going to build this new type of application where the dominant inputs and outputs are voice and computer vision, it actually is a different paradigm than building a web application. It's a stateful application paradigm, not a stateless application paradigm. I could get into that, but suffice to say, it's a different paradigm. And what we're doing is we're building tooling all across the stack, kind of end to end, for a developer to build for that new paradigm.
It's an interesting thought. Let me interrogate it now.
Please.
The first thing I want to say is what the world that you're describing, which I don't know. Maybe it's coming soon. Where, it kind of sounds like if Siri was ubiquitous and worked, where you just kind of interact with these digital assistants through voice commands. But when you say, call dad, it doesn't call McDonald's. Like, it actually, right? It does what you want it to do.
Exactly.
And so that. The first thing I want to say, which is not really an interrogation of your idea, is that it's a really interesting picture, because there's so much discourse in this industry, and you hear a lot about this idea of, if you're not learning how to use these things, then you're going to get left behind. And I've always been, somewhat frustrated by that phrasing, but also kind of think it's funny, because the idea of AI, which is automated task doing, is that it's less of a user, like, everyone knows how to do it because you're communicating to it with natural language. So the kind of future you're painting, which is just you talk to it, you ask it, you tell it to do something, and it does something. You ask it for information, it provides it. That's not a world where, you either know how to use it or you don't know how to use it. The idea is that it works or it doesn't, more so than you know how to do it. The idea is natural, right? Natural language processing, right? It's all... And so I think that's just a really interesting thing that I feel like a lot of people are missing, which is this is not learning how to code in Python or whatever. Like, it's just a function of integration in the way humans kind of do it. It's them kind of, the computer meeting us rather than us meeting the computer.
Exactly, yeah. The computer is now, when they get really smart, they adapt to you instead of you adapting to it. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but when I was in, I think it was fifth grade, it was fifth grade, I had to learn keyboarding. I had to learn how to, I'm old, but I had to learn how to type on this thing, and they track your words per minute and all of that stuff, and how good you were at it. And I had to teach myself how to do this thing at a young age, right? And my dad still finger types, right? He can't actually type, quickly in the way that, folks from our generation, or my generation at least, know how to do. And of course, all the younger generations do too. But I think it's going to be something similar too. Even though voice feels like this natural thing and the computer adapts to us, I think it'll definitely work better than learning how to type. But backing up, like I remember when the image gen stuff first came out with like DALL-E and all of that, and you had to write these like crazy prompts to get it to like make a good image. You had to put like random words in there, Nikon, whatever, like it's just some random phrases. And there was this moment in time where people were like, oh man, prompt engineers are going to be a thing. And it's like, being good at prompting does matter, but if you have to engineer a prompt, it's almost like a bug, not a feature. When the system works actually well, it can work for everyone. That's the whole promise of AI, is that it can adapt and personalize itself to everybody, their style of communicating, their style of articulation. That's where it's ultimately going to go, and it is going to feel natural for everyone. But on the point around kind of being able to leverage this technology or maximally leverage it, I remember when Salesforce did Dreamforce and they talked about Agentforce in it and all of that. It was kind of like there was a bit of like a shots fired between like Salesforce was talking about AI agents and then Microsoft was talking about copilots, and you see now Microsoft talking a lot about agents. But what's interesting about copilots is that for folks like me, I don't know if we like really are adapted to knowing how to use them or to maximally leverage them. There's another generation younger than me, or maybe a couple younger than me, that Gen Alpha, I guess is what it is, that who will know how to use copilots or, kind of just because that's what they grew up with, versus me. I'm still used to like writing code myself, though I do use Cursor now a bunch. And I have vibe code occasionally on the weekends. But I think even for like this next phase, right, with agentic computing and like agents doing things for you and how you interact with that computer, the interface will be very human. And I think eventually in the fullness of time, it will be adapted to everyone. But I still think there is going to be like an adoption curve where the folks that are growing up with it kind of natively are the best at leveraging it, and it makes sense to them. I mean, one more point I'll make on this is that like if you look at the iPhone, it's like the most intuitive, or the iPad, it's the most intuitive interface we've ever had, and yet my parents still, my mom's pretty savvy, but my dad still struggles with like how to use an iPhone properly, even though it's so intuitive and more adapted to the human kind of natural behaviors or natural inputs than, or intuition than like a keyboard and a mouse. But he can use a desktop computer decently well. He has, a lot more mileage on that. But this more intuitive thing, it's not as clear to him. And so, even though the interface becomes more and more and more human, I still think that there's like a learning curve that the youngest people who are growing up with it are going to be able to maximally leverage, not folks like me.
The adoption curve is a really interesting point. And it is, so many things. It's a very jagged line of kind of everything. Even like performance, reliability in these things is a jagged line. They do one thing really well, and then they do something basic absolutely horribly. But the idea of, in general, what adoption looks like. And I think there's a lot of elements to it. I mean, to your iPhone point, that's an interesting one. And then there's also some people that are just kind of force themselves to pick it up. Like my grandmother is great with an iPhone. She texts me all the time, and she uses it, even though that's not everyone her age. She's over 90 are iPhone users.
Yeah.
Right.
My partner's grandmother is 97, and she like uses Giphy and like
awesome.
She stores all her photos in Google Photos, and she's complaining about how her storage is running out. I'm just like,
me too.
97? That's so insane.
Yeah, so you have that, but the adoption in general, and this was my thought in response to your thought earlier, which is I think that's where the industry is going.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a longer lag than we might expect in terms of the industry got there and
Yeah.
everyone else is using it. Like if you track the iPhone stuff, that kind of blew up. Pretty almost remarkably quickly. Looking at Steve Jobs holds the thing up and then people are
I know.
using it and
Yeah.
it's just the thing for something like this. And I think part of the reason is because it's been tried before and it had like Siri's been around for a while. Alexa isn't
Hmm.
new. And so to reintroduce things that have been around and people messed around with when it first came out and then kind of don't really use too much anymore or only use for like, hey, Siri, set a timer or whatever, like very targeted things.
Yep.
It's like the muscle memory of training how we do things. And the other interesting element of that adoption, which is just, I mean, it makes prediction impossible. We have no idea how people are going to respond to stuff, is that, where we're sitting, I mean, you're in San Fran, I'm in New York, but
Hmm.
in this country, I think we think about adoption differently than globally, where other parts of the world don't even have reliable electricity half the time,
Yeah,
and
for
and
sure.
it's you see an even more dramatic shift of what adoption even means and what becomes necessary in terms of technology, not just advancing for its own sake, but advancing people too.
Yep. Yep.
And I think that just makes things interesting and a little messy.
While technological progress outpaces evolution, the adoption of these technologies is somewhat evolutionary in shape. I mean, I think the curve is steeper, but the messiness of it, I think, the integration of it, I think, is definitely looks a lot more evolutionary in nature. And a few thoughts there. I think what you said around the adoption of it, the William Gibson quote, I think it's William Gibson, that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. A lot of people like to drop that now these
Yeah.
days in the AI revolution, but it is definitely true. Um, that's certainly a thing. Another thought related to it, just on like the adoption piece, is it ties into something else I've been really thinking about. People often, ask me because we have like the transport network, right, for carrying all the audio and video data, and people are like, well, is that going to be needed in the future? Because aren't we just going to have models just running on everybody's devices? And I'm like, well, you know, these models are like pretty heavyweight. I mean, like Llama 4 needs like a H100 or whatever, for instance, or something like that, and or maybe the Behemoth one does. But if you ignore kind of, Apple needs to sell devices, right? Like they're incentivized to push more and more powerful devices and to push the model capabilities farther out to the edge and onto these devices themselves. So they're incentivized to do that. But in terms of like adoption of this technology, I think there's another world where you can go the opposite direction, where you rely more on the network and you actually just sell very cheap devices that don't really have to do much other than talk to the cloud or like to a model running on the edge. Um, and and it's a very lightweight device that can just, I don't know, render pixels or render some rudimentary UI, and it doesn't have to do anything super fancy, and you let AI kind of do most of the work for you, or the heavy lifting in terms of answering questions or accessing services or being able to buy goods, and et cetera. And I think that in that world, you can actually, um, it's a force multiplier for like the ability for widespread adoption, just because um, you don't need to kind of extend the choice of adopting the technology or not all the way out to every single person, but instead you improve the infrastructure, um, which is more of a centralized piece. You kind of improve the infrastructure everywhere and then allow people to have very low cost devices to access that infrastructure. Um, and you have more agency over being able to improve that infrastructure than you do over getting every single person to buy this next iPhone, let alone afford it, if they can afford it. And so I think it's a really interesting question, and I think you're right too in general that this stuff is going to move super fast, but it's going to take a while for it to actually proliferate and be everywhere. Find ubiquity.
There are so many clashes sometimes, I feel like, within this industry and what technology that we're trying to develop. And when we're talking about like Llama needs an H100 to run, is everyone iPhone gonna come loaded with like a super crazy tiny NVIDIA chip that NVIDIA makes for iPhone? Everyone has models and they run it all the time.
Yep.
I started thinking a couple of seconds ago, right? Is this more than most people need? And I think AI aside, we're probably at a point already where, I feel like you hear this often. I'm not inventing this statement, but like your iPhone is a more powerful computer than the one they used to send people to the moon. We stream Netflix on it. And even more powerful levels of computing, I feel like probably most people don't need it. And it seems it's one of those things where if you're a scientist, more powerful computers, holy crap, you're going to do great stuff. If you are operating a business, more powerful computers are almost certainly going to help you. Depending on the business, it's a little bit different. As we push into the individual consumer thing, like the idea of mass adoption, AI models on every phone, everyone's talking to their personal whatever assistant, you start to get into a degree of, and I don't know what this means for adoption. I don't know if people are thinking about this because people adopt stuff they don't need all the time, but is it more than people need? And then is it more than people want? Because if the idea is starting to automate things that people do, where's the push and pull of like, what's the thing that people like doing, even if it takes them time, because there's enjoyment in like living and it's not always, maybe I like whatever, going to the grocery store. I think it's fun personally. Maybe I like doing XYZ thing and I don't want to automate that. But I think where we are pushing to is a world where people will start being faced with the choice of, you could probably automate that somewhat reliably, or you could do it yourself. And I think where a lot of the fear comes from is that they won't be allowed to make that choice.
This idea of adoption and it being messy and things like that, my mind immediately goes to like old cars and how there are some people that like to have their old cars and work on them and continue to drive them and don't really want like all the new fancy stuff. And over time, what has happened is that like smog restrictions and stuff have kind of, that floor has moved up and up and up to the point where it's pretty hard to get a classic car to pass smog. And you're almost kind of forced into embracing the next paradigm or the next two paradigms. I think it's, generations have changed. Yeah. There's been more than one just technological improvement across, automotive vehicles in that time since classic cars. But yeah, you almost get forced to adopt it. And I think one important question is, in this next revolution, like how quickly do we force people into kind of the adoption of it? Is that also accelerating the speed at which we do that? I'm not really sure, but so that's one thought that I don't know the answer to, but I can definitely see some analogies to it in history. The other thing that I think is interesting about what you said, I've been thinking about this too a little bit, which is, well, there's two thoughts. One, you talked about kind of, do we need this stuff? Like, do we need these models to be as massive as they are? One thought on that, I had a conversation recently about, well, what if you just had a model that maybe it ran completely on your device and it knew how to like read and write, and it understood some knowledge. Maybe it's like gone all the way up to school through college or something like that. It's read like all the college textbooks. And I mean, I'm not sure if that's enough for kind of generalization with these models, these LLMs. That's another question too about this LLM architecture and if this is the right way. But if you have a model that, let's say it's got college level intelligence and it knows how to read and write, why isn't that enough? And you just let it read the internet the way that we do. Like we go and we unlock our phone and we Google something or etc. I mean, I guess now we ChatGPT something, but like before that, we would just Google something and look it up and check the weather and all of this stuff. Like, why not just leverage, have an agent that just goes and does that? And then if you want to have like kind of casual conversation with it, it can do that with you because it knows how to read, write. It's college level intelligence, um, and that's good enough. Like, does it have to be? I guess the question is like, do you need a super powerful GPU for just kind of the basic reading, writing? Doesn't have all the knowledge in the world like ChatGPT does, but just for the basics. I'm not sure. And if the answer is yes, that you need a super powerful GPU for that, then there's probably some kind of issue here with the architecture underneath, just because like I have a brain and this thing is not as intelligent as ChatGPT and it works. Like, works well enough and I can get through life and do stuff. Like, why can't we create something that runs on a phone, completely that has at least my level of intelligence and capability? The last thing you talked about is like, these super smart AI models, like, are they just going to take all of the jobs? And maybe the hot take or the spicy take for the show is yes, they will. I think people like to suggest that they won't, but the answer is yes. Once we have humanoid robots and like super smart AI and they can do everything, what aren't they coming for? I think that that's the reality, but I also, on the other side of that coin, I was at a dinner and I said, what do you guys think about this idea that AI and, all the deployment of AI inside humanoid robots, inside our personal devices, just AI generally, what if it is like actually the ultimate in longevity technology? What I mean by that is the only non-renewable resource is time. You cannot make more time. I know there are people working on it, trying to do that. Brian Johnson is trying to give everybody some more time, whether that works out or not. But I respect him at least sort of trying. And what AI ultimately does is, if the computer can do more for you, if it can like perform actions for you, but on the kind of goods consuming side, and you have like humanoid robots that are farming and doing all of that work and stuff, and so it's like actually saving us all time on the labor side too, the good production side. You just have a lot more time, like, to do stuff. Like, most people out there, my partner is not in tech at all, and she's a special needs preschool teacher, and all of her friends are not in tech. And I spend a lot of time with them and have conversations. And one thing they talk about is like, they work because they have to, not because they want to. I think that's something that a lot of people miss by being in technology. Maybe we're also excited about it, or I don't know, maybe everyone's making so much money that that's all they're thinking about. I'm not really sure, but the point being that most people out there work because they have to. They definitely like to progress and they like to improve themselves, and like there's definitely goals like that. But do you want to be doing your exact job? I'm not really sure. At least the data points I have are that most people don't. And all of a sudden, maybe you don't have to anymore. And so what does that leave you to do? It leaves you to pursue creative endeavors, anything that excites you, whatever that may be. Maybe you learn how to play an instrument. I think that another question that kind of ties into that is like, oh, well, if a robot can just like play the violin better than everybody, or if a robot can play basketball better than everybody, are we still going to, what happens to that? Like, do we do any of those activities anymore? And I'd say that the answer is yes. And the reason why is, in entertainment, like, we don't just consume entertainment content because people are really good at it, like that The Last of Us is a great show, or that Roger Federer is amazing at playing tennis, or anything like that. Part of the reason that we like consume that content and enjoy that content is because we can relate to that content. It was made by a human, and we know it was made by a human. And chess is a game that has been solved for a long time now. Computers can beat every human at chess, but we still watch Magnus Carlsen play chess. Why? Because we can see ourselves in Magnus. Even though we don't have his abilities, it's within the capabilities of myself to be, being a human, to be that good at something. And you can appreciate that because someone that looks just like you is able to do this thing. So I'm still going to watch Roger Federer and Nadal play like a reunion match or whatever, because I can appreciate how much you have to train and practice to be as good as they are at this sport. And I've picked up a racket before, and I played all my, during my childhood, and so I really admire that. But I can't relate that to a machine. Like a machine in my head, I'm like, of course a machine is going to be better than a human because it can do things that humans can't, or with a level of precision and speed that a human can't. Like it's an artificial thing, and so I think on both sides, I think it's. I don't think that AI is going to replace creative and like human endeavors where we connect and relate to somebody else because they're another human and what they've done. And I also think it's going to take away all the undesired jobs that don't really fulfill us or are kind of like a proxy towards doing something that we truly do enjoy, and just unlock so much more time for us to go and pursue those things instead.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. Take me to that universe. I mean, I'd still be doing the same thing, but I'm sure you would too.
For what it's worth, yeah.
I think it's interesting for a lot of reasons. The first thing to me about the specifics of like the job point, and you got humanoid robots, they're going to kind of just come in and do their thing. I think as long as reliability remains less than like 95, 96% in these systems, full-scale replacement can't happen.
100%.
And so the key is cracking reliability and then proving that you've cracked reliability. And that is proving to be remarkably challenging, to your earlier point about are LLMs the right architecture. And if you look at things in different ways, like if you scale down the drama of the vision that we're reaching towards, LLMs are freaking fantastic. There's so much you can do with them, and machine vision models, and there's so much you can do when you apply it as specific tools to me, not even just make you more efficient, but to do things that we couldn't really do before.
Yep.
I was reading an article today about that there's a train company in Japan who is now using rail cars equipped with cameras and onboard computing chips to do track inspection. They used to do it on foot until 2024.
Amazing.
That's not necessarily like that stuff has to be checked. There has to be reliability. There's really high safety standards, right?
Yep.
To me, that's not like a job replacement thing. That's just we can do this better. And so it's different ways of looking at things, but to me, it all kind of is centered around the reliability thing and then the validity of that reliability. And then, I mean, just because we're playing in these kinds of hypotheticals and it's fun, assuming we are able to crack that. And I don't know how. Anyone who says they know how we're going to crack those two things, they're lying. No one knows how. Then you get into a world that, to me, is interesting to think about and kind of scary. The idea of, we can kind of do whatever we want. Obviously, right? Very few people would be working if they had a choice. Like, they do it because they have to. There are these kind of overriding systems. This is the game you have to play.
So.
Whether you're 23 and an engineer in San Francisco doing the 996, or you're an accountant at PwC and it's busy season and you can't breathe right now. Like, no one really wants to be doing these things. They do it because they have to. That is absolutely true. The world that we push toward, I just don't know what the world looks like where the tech works, the robots do everything, and people can kind of float around and like do what they want, because like we do live in the society we live in. We do, like, it is a capitalistic society.
Yep.
I don't know a way, and so Sam Altman's talked about UBI. I don't know a way that these kinds of things play out that's not dystopic. Like, I don't know how we enable that to happen without ceding control to private corporations or private corporations plus a government. Like, it just seems
Yeah.
very, like, if you play out the hypothetical of the hypothetical, like, like I don't the harder, and I've thought about this a lot because the UBI point gets brought up a lot, and I'm like, the harder I think
Mm-hmm.
about it, the more I'm either like, I don't know if that could work just because our systems are so ingrained, and two, I don't know if people would want that to work because it, like maybe what you lose to get there is more than what you would think.
The other part of this it's not necessarily related to UBI, but maybe like loosely related to it, is the thing that I don't think is going to change, even in this world. Let's say AI is doing all the manual labor and all the jobs are done by computers. The thing that I don't think will change is that humans are still status seeking. Um, we, I mean, there are people, they're not working, but they're playing Fortnite and they love to like beat each other at Fortnite, or be the top ranked Valorant team or something like that. It's like people are still competing at things, even though there's really no monetary gain to be made. Yes, there are pro gamers and stuff like that, but even beyond below that level, there are folks that just compete to win and to say that they won, and to be at the top of a leaderboard of something. Like we still compete for the likes on social media. It's like we are status seeking in nature, and I think that that's definitely not going to stop. I think like, so people will still be pushing hard. Maybe just less people will, in aggregate. The other thing that I think is pretty important, again, it's not really a comment about UBI and how to structure society, but one thing that I think is really important about this revolution that we're going through, in the fullness of time, like one thing that is going to happen is uh, the kind of the floor for quality of life is going to continue to rise, right? It's not that there won't be rich people. It's not that there won't be like, the Elons of the world who are super rich, but there will be that delta between like what you can obtain being super wealthy and what you can obtain being just average or at the bottom. That gap is going to shrink continuously. Something that maybe, I don't know if people feel comfortable with this idea or understanding, but like, if you I've had the privilege of eating at a really fancy restaurant before, and the food tastes good. It's great. But then I also go eat at like falafel stop in Sunnyvale. Shout out South Bay, and I think that tastes just as good, and it costs me like 1/30th or something of what a fancy restaurant costs me, and there is just a cap to how good food can taste. There is a cap to how good life can be. To be honest, like there is a limit to the human experience, and that's like the limits of the laws of physics in the universe. Like it can only get so good, and money is like one way of procuring like more and more like unobtainable human experiences. But that floor moves up and that gap shrinks. The amount that you can experience or obtain or have at the lowest level in the future and at the highest level, very small. And so in some ways, I think, a lot of people get upset about how this wealth disparity, and it is upsetting to look at it. But I think what gives me a little bit of hope in the future is that disparity actually doesn't matter after a while. Like we're going to have this age of abundance idea. I guess I'm getting a little bit more utopian again, but in that world, like it actually means less and less to be rich outside of status games. Like what you can actually do with the dollars matters less and less.
We call it utopia for a reason, right? I am a natural born cynic. I don't believe in utopia. Just because it sounds too good, and then I think too much. I think too hard about it. Like because someone always has to be in control. Human society is just wild, and someone's always in control. And it's just I feel like we accept messiness today for large parts of the world, not everywhere, for a
Mm-hmm.
pretty significant degree of freedom. And the more and this brings me up to the last point that I did want to make with you,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which is so much of this that we've talked about today, so much of the industry is kind of it's science that is almost inspired by science fiction. You
Yes.
even I read a bunch of your blog posts. You kind of mentioned this as well. All the different like HAL 9000 and Jarvis and Samantha, right? There are so many examples throughout science fiction, and in many ways, and voice mode and Altman's rollout of voice mode was very her. He tweeted her, right? That,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a that there's a
Yeah.
science fiction push, an inspiration where I feel like for the longest time, the scientists who grew up watching Star Wars were like, I want to make C-3PO, or whatever it is, I want to make that happen.
Yep.
And I think it's really interesting because science fiction as a field, science fiction and fantasy, they kind of use these fantastical devices as metaphors and allegories for commentaries on human society. And this is why my last point kind of bridged it, right? And a lot of that centers around control and freedom and what is
Mm-hmm.
humanity, like value-driven stuff. And that science, that pursuit of making elements of science fiction seem real, to some, depending on which quarter of Twitter, pour one out for the bird, you follow, is kind of misguided because the point of the story was not, hey, you should make this thing. It was the guys who made this thing should have thought a lot harder before they tried to make the thing, and then things didn't go well, and
Right.
and something was lost, and so I wanted to bring that up to you because I had a feeling you would have an interesting perspective on that, the way that science fiction is this guiding light, and whether the people that are looking at it as a guiding light, like, are they missing a point of the story that they're trying to make real?
I certainly don't think that there's any new ideas under the sun. Like these things have all been thought
Yeah.
about before. Um, Humans had, you know, we've had a lot of time to think about these things, right? And just contemplate life. I was watching the Black Mirror, not Black Mirror, sorry. I was watching the White Lotus, different color. I was watching the White Lotus finale, and they have a bunch of Buddhist references in this latest season 3. I was just thinking about how enlightened Buddha was, and like all of these like lessons, and I'm just like, man, talking about suffering, and like once you get a level of success, it just means more suffering, and like it's you're on this treadmill, and like a lot of these thoughts, it just strikes me, it's like these are like coming from, like, I don't know, thousands of years ago, and you're just like, how did they figure this out like so long ago, right? And so suffice to say, there are no new ideas, and we're really just kind of uh, taking other people's dreams and like making them reality. And then maybe we have new dreams too, and then those become reality in the subsequent generations that come after us. And so I think that that's one thought. I think with any technology, it's going to be leveraged for good, and it's going to be leveraged for evil. I think I think what's interesting about AI is that like the degree to the amount of good it can create is massive, and the degree to the amount of destruction it can bring is also massive. So that's another thought, and it is scary, to be honest. Like I think it's okay right now because we're not there yet, but 10 years, 20 years, it's going to be pretty weird time. And I'm not really sure how it's going to go. The other thought on it too, maybe this is me going from like this whole show just like utopian, to maybe a little bit more cynical or dystopian. I think that there's certainly a lot more. I mean, intuitively, I actually don't know if this is mathematically true, but intuitively, I think there are a lot more ways that it can go wrong than it can go right. And the reason I think that is because the more AI is like now like a very diffuse thing, right? There are a lot of labs and they're all around the world and they're all working on this and the capabilities are kind of converging. And the LLM, or like this probabilistic computer, is going to be commoditized in the future. I think everyone believes that now. And by definition of being commoditized, that means that it is diffuse. It's everywhere, and like everyone has access to this technology. And that also means that responsibility is diffuse. And like if anybody can take this super powerful technology and use it for nefarious means, it's hard to control. And so there's just a lot more. Usually in technology, you want to avoid single points of failure, but here there's like thousands and thousands of points of failure, and the effect of that failure, because AI is so powerful in what it can be used for, both good and bad, it just means that there's a lot more ways that it can go wrong. And so I think that's, yeah, it's super scary. I don't have an answer to it though. I mean, if I had an answer, then I guess we'd be okay. Because other people smarter than me would have the answer too, and we'd be kind of going down the right path. The last thing I'll say on this though, and this is swinging back to utopian world, I do think that like, I do inherently think humans are wired for good. I believe that. I think you can definitely have, you can grow up in difficult environments, for sure, and that shapes you in a lot of ways. But I do think inherently humans want to do good, want to be good. I don't think it's full blank slate. For me, my personal belief is that humans are wired for good, and so I think that intention wise, I think that most people will want to see that utopia happen or want to use this technology for good. But because the technology is so powerful in the hands of even just one person that's has a nefarious intent, that's what really kind of puts us at risk. That quote of "This is why we can't have nice things" or whatever. That's the situation we're in.
Interesting philosophies, right? I agree with you. I think humans are wired for good. I think in certain circumstances we rewire ourselves for not good, but as a product of nature, I think nature's intent is growth in progress. Yes. Which is good, in balance. Like everything naturally exists in balance, and it's the kind of artificial things that we do to it in attempts to subjugate it or subjugate each other that put things out of balance. And then that's where even like the competition over social media likes, which is the turf wars of medieval times happening today.
Right.
And that's the confounding thing for me, which is if goodness is hardwired into us, if it's in our nature, if it is natural to do that, and technology, to the degree that it brings us further away from that, to your point, right, has me nervous. There's a lot of failure points, and as someone who loves taking walks in the woods, I think as much as technology proliferates, again, us making the conscious choice of it's everywhere, but I'm not going to tolerate it being everywhere on me all the time, because the natural environment is where the goodness kind of comes from. So it's I don't know, confounding.
No, yeah, I think you brought up one thought for me, which is I also agree with you on all these things. The one thought, just to tie it into what I said, is that I remember Naval was on a podcast once, I think, and he talked about how humans can be generally wired for good, like I think most of us are. It's that paired with the fact that the capabilities of technology get more and more powerful, and that destruction is so much easier than building, that it just takes one right person to create like a virus that and weaponize it, and it wipes everybody out. Like it's the technology is getting so powerful in the hands of just one person that there will always be, I think there's generally going to be more people that are wired for good, but there's always going to be some people that aren't. And what those people can do with increasingly powerful tools to execute on their plans, that's what puts us in a precarious position as a society.
Right. To paraphrase Tolkien, evil does not create, it perverts. But man, I'm losing track of time. And so I think we'll cut it there, but this was a lot of fun, Russ. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. I had a lot of fun too. Thanks so much, Ian.